Welcome to Financials for Microsoft Dynamics SL 2015. My name is Jeff Suin and I will be your instructor for this course. Some background about me. Again, my name is Jeff Suin. I am the Product Marketing Manager for Microsoft Dynamics SL. What does that involve? Well, it involves creating sales tools for Microsoft Dynamics SL products for the partners, working and presenting webinars and events for Microsoft, as well as working with customers and partners to discuss what are those next new features that we need to make sure are included in the next version of Microsoft Dynamics SL. My background is over 18 years working in the Dynamics SL space. I started as a consultant and a developer and now am working in the marketing area. And I'm really excited today to get an opportunity to show you guys the great things about financials in Microsoft Dynamics SL. With that, the topics for today are going to be General Ledger, Accounts Payable, Accounts Receivable, and Cash Manager. With that, the target audience of this presentation is for new customers, so people who are looking at SL to find out, is this the right solution for me? As well as those that have just started implementing SL and they'd like to get their people up to speed on the basics of using Dynamics SL Financials. As far as your background, you do need to have obviously a general knowledge of financial information and basic computer and Windows skills. With that, let's get started with the General Ledger. Module overview, what we'll be doing is going over the setup screens that are in Dynamics SL's financial modules, maintenance screens, input screens, process screens, and finally inquiries and reporting. For our setup screens, we're going to start off with the General Ledger setup, but before that, let's get into the understanding of how information is entered into Microsoft Dynamics SL through our Journal Transaction screen. So, before we start looking at the setup screens so we can get some idea of some items that we're going to talk about on the setup screen, we want to talk real high level about this Journal Transaction screen. So in the Dynamics SL product, you're going to be entering things, and we call them batches. Batches can be a series of documents, multiple documents, single documents. But it's the idea that we do things in batches. The second thing is, as we're entering things into the system, we have the idea of a period being either a fiscal or a calendar year, depending on how you've set it up in the system, along with the year that it's created around. So you have that idea of a period and a year. The next is we have the idea of accounts. Accounts that we set up in the system that go ahead and allow us to put information to get it, whether it's assets, expenses, accruals, whatever we're putting in the system. We set up an account to be able to define that information in the system. And then we use sub-accounts to kind of break that down into more details. So whether we can break the sub-account down into departments, divisions, locations, we use that idea of the combination of an account and a sub-account to be able to bring that information and store that information in the database. The next, we have transaction dates, and a lot of our information in the system is transaction date driven, so we need to make sure we're keeping track of when things are coming into the system. And lastly, we have a reference number, which is important to keep track of how things are entered to be able to track them as they flow through the system as they come into the General Ledger. So first, we're going to take a look, next we're going to take a look at a setup screen. Now the setup screen is important. This is what we're going to be using to set up the rest of the General Ledger, which then flows into other modules as well. So with that, let's go ahead and jump live into our General Ledger setup screen. In the Microsoft Dynamics SL maintenance area, setup area, we have a General Ledger setup screen. And based on the things that we've just talked about, the first thing we have is some information about account information. So we have places to define accounts that are going to be used for specific reasons inside the product. So for example, year-to-net income and retained earnings are basically places where we can set up default accounts that will be used. We talked about the idea of a batch. Inside of each module, including General Ledger, we have the idea that you're going to have a batch defined for each area and a unique number assigned to that. So this is where we can notify, this is the batch number that we're working on, and this is the last one that's been out there. The next is, we talked about reference numbers briefly there, and the idea is as we're putting things into the system, we will have reference numbers, and we can choose how those reference numbers are assigned. We can choose whether we want to have them automatically assigned, whether we want to go ahead and have it not automatically assigned, or making it optional for us during our data entry point. Next is another thing called retention. Now, the idea behind retention is that we can set up exactly how much information we want to store in the system based on our needs. So, for example, we have the periods to retain transactions, we have the periods to retain GL transactions, and we also have the years to retain GL balances. Now, this is all something you can set up based on your needs, but it is an important thing to set up to understand how much information that you want to set up in the system. With that, we'll go to our next tab, which is our Master Information tab. Now, the idea with inside Dynamics SL is that we can have multiple companies. It's not just one company. And you want to be able to set it up so you might have a master company, but you might have subsidiaries. So when you're setting up General Ledger, when we initially set it up, we're going to find what that master company is. So looking here at the Master Company tab, we have the idea that the master company is Company 60, and we have the related information as far as address, names, and so forth. The next tab that we're going to talk about is the Fiscal Information tab. So Fiscal Information gives us a place to go ahead and define periods for Microsoft Dynamics SL. Looking at the screen, we'll see that we can define how many fiscal periods there are in a year. Could be 12, could be 13, again, based on your current needs. The next is going to tell us, well, what are we currently setting in as fiscal periods? And we can see currently it's defined as 12. We can also then determine what our fiscal year is, whether it's going to be based on the beginning of the calendar year or the ending of the calendar year. Now, as you know, fiscal setup can be very different based on your company. It could be based on the complete year. So maybe you're running from January to December, or you could be maybe running in a fiscal period where you're starting in July and running to June. So, and this is where you're going to find that information. So we're defining periods that are in those fiscal periods, and we're able to set up exactly when they end for each of the different periods. The next is currency information. One of the modules, we won't be going to details today, but one of the abilities, obviously, is the ability to set up multiple currencies. Here, I don't have multiple currencies in setup, so I'm just going to be seeing the base currency, which we're seeing the currency ID, the caption, the symbol, and so forth. But we're seeing what is the base currency for this company. Now, if I did implement the multi-company functionality, I could set up a different base currency for each of those different companies I set up. The next section we're going to talk about is the chart of accounts order. Now, the idea of a chart of accounts order is to determine exactly what is the order that we're going to be setting up our accounts. It's going to serve you two purposes. One, when you're setting up an account, if it's an asset, a liability, an income, or expense, you can say, I want them to be grouped in different ways, in different orders as you see on the screen. But then also, it gives me the ability that when I'm running my reports, it's going to know exactly what I'm running my reports and what should be printed out first, second, third, or in some cases, fourth. So you have that ability to set up through some preset ideas, but you also have the ability to use a completely custom order if that makes sense to your company. The next tab that we have is the budget information. Budget information allows to set up things, and we'll talk about subaccounts in a second more, but we have the ability to set up for an account and for a subaccount what is the budget for the year. We can decide what the current fiscal period is for the year. We have an idea of a ledger, which we'll talk about more in a second. And then we're setting up what are those different segments that are in the system. And we also have the functionality to actually import things outside of Dynamics SL in there. So if you have this set up in a spreadsheet already and you want to import it, we have that ability to import it as well. Last, we have the ability of posting, and we'll get into more details as we get into the actual entering of data. But we have the idea to go ahead and decide how things get posted. Within Microsoft Dynamics SL, you have the idea of these different periods, and you have the ability to say, when I close a period, so I've closed, the period number 3, when we're in period 4, should I be able to post back to period 3? You can set it up that it prevents people from doing that. You can set it up that, we're going to prevent people, but we're going to give certain people access rights because maybe they're managers or people that have the ability to post things to previous periods. So you have that ability to set that up here, turn things on, turn them off. And you also have the ability to go ahead, if we look on the screen, that you can go ahead and prevent posting to prior periods, fiscal periods as well. So you have a whole bunch of different areas that you can set up inside there. So we've covered a lot there, so let's just kind of recap. Again, we talked about the general ledger options that we had there, the master company information. We also talked about setting up your fiscal periods and how we need to think about how we do this and how that applies to our company, and exactly how those period ending dates are going to be in our company. We next talked real briefly about the currency information and the fact that if we had multiple currencies, we could set up different general ledger setups and different base currencies. We talked about our chart of account order and the order of accounts, and basically how this is going to limit how we can set up things inside the system, but also be used for reporting purposes. We also talked a little bit about budgeting and the fact that we can create budgets and import them from some other places. And lastly, we talked about some posting options, being able to prevent posting to previous periods or previous fiscal years. So there we've gone ahead and walked through just one of the setup screens, the main setup screen for General Ledger. So the next thing we want to do is talk about the maintenance screens that we're going to go walk through. So get an idea, now that we have the basic setup of General Ledger, what are the next steps I need to do in setting up? So we look at our maintenance screens. We do have the chart of accounts, which we'll talk about. Again, we talked about accounts and sub-accounts. We'll talk about how those are set up. We'll then go into some setup things behind it around, for example, our flex key setup information, which allows you to define exactly what can and cannot be viewed inside of a sub-account or other areas. We'll talk about our ledger maintenance and budget maintenance. We talked about the setup of it, but what if I actually wanted to go in and do something with that? So with that, let's go ahead and switch over to our chart of accounts screen. Now the chart of accounts screen, allows us to define an account. Account can be up to 10 characters long. We also have the ability to define the type of account it is, the class ID that's associated to it, and the account status and posting options. So let's go ahead and jump live into the screens. And if we go ahead and get to the menu, and I jump into the maintenance area and go to Chart of Accounts Maintenance, we'll show it to you live. Again, a 10-character field. It can be as long or as short as you need. Next, we just have our description, the type. Is it an asset, a liability, an income, and expense? You have the ability to set any of those up as you would expect. Now, on top of that, if you need to get to more detailed or granular information, we also include something called class IDs, which allows you to take it down to a kind of a further detail area for potential reporting needs or your needs to actually classify things that are in the system. We also have additional information around whether it's an active account, and this also interacts with other modules inside of Dynamics SL, so we can set up different information around things that work with other modules like our project modules and so forth. So again, the real basics, setting up your chart of accounts and being able to find those accounts. Again, this is where you're going to find what's going to be used throughout all the different modules within inside of Microsoft Dynamics SL. Next screen we'll take a look at. Let's go ahead and take a look at our sub-account maintenance screen. Now what you can do within the sub-account maintenance screen is you do have that idea of that you have an account that you're using, but then you want to go ahead and you want to take that account and you want to actually break it down into more information. So yes, it might be a certain value, but then you want to break it down to administration for different areas. You can see on our screen here, they've chosen to break things down, administration for different locations. We can do different things for sales areas. As I scroll through different areas for engineering, engineering for project management, engineering for engineers. So think of this as an ability to really break things down into the details that you want. Now, a common question goes, how do I create those sub-accounts? So one of the things that we have included is a screen called the FlexKey Table Maintenance area. And if I jump over here, there's a FlexKey definition table. And the idea behind this FlexKey definition table is that we can set up certain fields inside of Dynamics SL to say, when I'm inside the screen, I only want to be able to see certain values inside the system. So with that, looking at the screen, we have different things we have here. For example, sub-account. Within that sub-account, I can define up to 8 different segments. Don't need them all, could only have one, that's fine, but we can go up to 8 different segments. We can define what is the length of that segment, And what type is it? Is it alphanumeric? Is it numeric? Is it ASCII? Whatever you happen to define in the system. Next thing we can do is decide whether this field is validated or not. When I say validated, I mean if I go into the system and I choose reporting unit, how is it going to know what is the right reporting unit? Well, if we choose the validate button there, we have another table here called the flexible table maintenance, which allows me to go in for each of those segments. And if I say, you know what, 00 should be default, 01 is going to be administration, 02 manufacturing, I have the flexibility to go into the system and say, yep, this is exactly what I want to have set up. Now what that allows people to do is when they're going in the system is to not enter in invalid values or values that you don't want them to have access rights to. Now another thing of the subaccount area is that we can also set valid combos required across the entire product. What that means is it will look to our subaccount maintenance screen, and what it will do is allow me to say this is the only valid value I can have. EN0000 is for engineering division. The nice thing about this is it really cuts down on the data entry. So if you can define what those valid values are, we can set them up once, and we're going to reduce the amount of possibly invalid data getting entered into our system. Again, it will be validated, but every time I put in a wrong value, I could be prompted every time. It's kind of it's a nice thing to set up in the system to say, yep, these is the complete subaccount, and this is how we want it to set up. If we go back to our PowerPoint, we can see a lot of the things that we talked about here for our subaccounts. One thing to note is that the subaccounts do get a length of 24 characters, so you can get pretty as long as you want. If you really want to get detailed about all those different locations, you do have that functionality. And as we talked about the flex key idea of being able to set up the flex keys, define it for a subaccount, and then for each subaccount segment, if you want to go ahead and set up what those values should be. Now there is one step to take beyond this. So I've said these are the accounts, here's all the valid subaccounts in the system, but what if I want to take it to the next location, or the next level, so to speak? So I've said these are the accounts, these are subaccounts. I can get really, really detailed and said it can only be this account with this subaccount. Now this subaccount maintenance screen that you're showing right here allows me to do that. It allows me to set up for a company. It says in this case right now, if I choose account 1000, I can only choose subaccount 10. If I turn that on, when people are entering data into the system, as we'll see later, that's the only thing they're going to be able to do. Again, you're narrowing it down, saying yes, this is the only valid values you can put in the system. And it is an optional thing that you can set up in the system as well. Now, where that comes to play, we'll use the screenshot here to show you, is that you can turn this on at the very bottom of the screen where it says validate account and subaccount. So when you turn that on, it's going to make sure that everything going into your journal transactions or other areas are valid. Again, it's going to make it so when things flow to your system, you're not wondering why someone chose that account subaccount combination. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the idea of ledgers. So inside of Dynamics SL, we have different type of items we can set up. We can set up ledgers for actual amounts that are being entered into the system, which is your standard, I'm putting things against my books. We can set up things for budgets. So we want to be able to set a budget ledger up, and a lot of times you're going to want to set up multiple budgets. So let me set up a budget for where we started this year, let me set a budget for next year, or let me set a what-if scenario. So on the screen here you can see we have the ability to set up an actual budget, a regular budget, an actual, or a statistical. Now what statistical can be used for is just keeping track of information around something possibly not really financially used, but just something you want to keep track of in the system. You can set those up as well. The next area we have is the ability to tell us what currency is going to be based on, and you can set up that for each of the different ledgers that you have set up in the system. Now ledgers are important, as you'll see as we go into the transaction screens and the other setup screens. The next is the budget maintenance screen, and this is where we can go and set up our budget information. So let me go ahead and jump into the live screen to give you an idea of how you would actually set up a budget. So located in our general ledger area, located under the maintenance screens, we do have our budget maintenance screen. Now what I can do is go in and choose a specific account. So I'm just going to choose the first one there and a specific subaccount. All right, I chose one that's not right, so let's go to a different one. So what I'm going to do here is switch out to my PowerPoint and talk through it that way. So what you can do inside of the budget maintenance screen is you choose an account, then you choose a sub-account, and then you choose the ledger ID that goes around with that particular budget. So in this case, I can choose budget 1, set it up for a current fiscal year, and then I can keep track of every time I revise it. Now what will happen is I can enter in an annual budget amount, and then it will prompt me to say, how would you like to break this out? I can either break it out evenly, or I can set up percentages, or I can just manually go through and type in the different values. Now this is great information. This information can be used when you're running reports, so you can see your actuals versus your budgets to see how you are doing for the year. Of course, we can go in and open that budget and make changes to it as we go down the road, things happen during the year and we want to make changes to it. We have that as well. Now, we also have an extended budgeting feature that's available in Dynamics SL that will allow it to get you a little more details that you can look and learn about as well. Now, the next thing we're looking at, so we've kind of gone through all the maintenance screens. So we've got our general ledger set up, we've set up our accounts, we've set up our sub-accounts. Now, how do I start entering things into this into the general ledger area? So that's the next section we're going to go through is around input screens. We're going to go through what we call the journal transaction screens, where it keeps track of your accounts and sub-accounts and your credits and debits. And then we'll talk something around something called generating recurring transactions. If there are things that are happening over and over again, how do you want to handle those? So the first thing we want to talk about here is the flow. How do things actually go through Dynamics SL? So I wanted to first take a step and look at this slide. So the idea behind is that we're going to put something into the journal transaction screen, or we'll talk about other screens and other modules. So it's going to be entered into the screen, into the idea, again, of a batch. And then the idea is after it's entered into the system, we're going to release it. Now what releasing does to it is it tells the system, I'm done with this batch, I'm happy with what's in there, and I don't want anybody to be able to edit it, so I'm going to release it. Now, releasing it prevents people being able to open, making edits to it, and it tells the system that this particular batch is ready to post to the general ledger. Now, what does post mean? Well, post means it's going to take those entries against those accounts and sub-accounts and those credits and debits and update the account history. So the account history tables will be saying, okay, they've put something into the general ledger module or any of the other modules. We've now posted it to the general ledger. So now let's update the accounts so they can recognize the fact that something's been credited or debited against that account. So that's the idea that I wanted to first get across so you kind of understand as we're starting to go through this journal transaction screen exactly how these work. So again, we're going to first start with the journal transaction screen. We'll go walk through the screen and talk about all these different things, but let's go ahead and jump back into our journal transaction screen. Now, located inside of the general ledger under our input section is our journal transaction screen. By opening up the screen, we're going to first display information about a batch that might be out there. So let's go ahead and pull up one so we can see the batch that is sitting out there and kind of talk our way through all the fields. The first thing is we're going to see at the top of the screen that we have the module that we're in. So the modules within inside of Microsoft Dynamics SL, General Ledger, Accounts Payable, Accounts Receivable, different areas from different other modules like the Project Series or the Purchasing Series. All those different modules, anything that flows through them into the General Ledger, we're going to have a module ID up there. And it's just going to let you know, by the way, that this type of batch that you're looking at came from this module. So an important thing to understand. That's why we have the module there. The next we have is a batch number. Now batch numbers are automatically assigned. And we saw in the general ledger setup that we're going to start at a certain number, it's automatically going to increment. So I don't really need to think about, okay, what's the next batch number? It will automatically increment that for me. Now, one of the basic things in Dynamics SL is when you're looking up something is that you can do a lookup list on certain fields. And the batch number is an example of that. So let's take a look at that. If I put my cursor on there, I can either double click on it or use my F3 key. It is going to give me a lookup list and show me all the different values that are in there. So you're seeing I'm at batch 154. Well, that means that there's been a lot of other batches entered into the system. So I can look on the screen and see the batch number, see exactly where it came from as far as the screen it was entered into, the status of it, which we'll talk about statuses here in a second, the period it was posted to, the period it was entered, and other information about that. So it gives me a way to get around the information. I can even do searches for different batches if I wanted to find a specific batch number that started with a value. I could use this drop-down box here to choose the information, find it, search it, and get to the information. The next is a journal type, and this is a general journal that we've entered into the system. The next one after that is the type of entry. So I'm just doing a one-time entry, so we call that basically a non-recurring type of entry. We could be putting an adjustment into the system, could be allocating. The idea of allocating is that maybe we're doing things like our utilities and we need to allocate it to different areas inside of our company. We could be doing a consolidation, taking things from different companies and putting it into one. We could be doing a manual entry, or we could be doing a recurring entry. The idea of recurring, which we'll talk about in a second, is that maybe it is something that we do every month. So every month, I'm opening up the screen and putting the same transaction into the system. That's a pain. I don't want to have to do that. So why don't we create something what we call a recurring transaction? I know how much it's going to be. I know it's going to happen every month or every quarter. So we can set those up. We'll take a look at that here in a second. So we have all those different types based on really your needs. The next is the period, and we talked about periods and the idea of, again, our the current period and the current period year. So it's going to default to the current one that's set up in this system and allow us to make changes if we need to. The next is the handling, and we'll talk about those in a second, but you have different options, whether, hey, hold off, I'm not ready to release it yet. Release later that says I'm ready for it to go forward, but we might do segregation of duties and say, you know what, you can just release it, you can't actually post it. And the release now that says, okay, if I can, I want to go ahead and release it now so it can post to our general ledger account history tables. Or no action, I'm not ready to move on it right now. Next, we have auto reference numbers. This is going to be, we talked about the idea that reference numbers, especially in all the different modules, we want reference numbers to be there to be able to keep track of our transactions. So if someone comes back and says, hey, where did that go? Where did the information flow? Yeah, a reference number is going to help you track it. Again, we're in the general ledger, but if it's in a different module, it'll allow us to flow it from one to the other. Auto reversing can be set up, whether this is an accrual that we need to set up and we want it to make the auto reversing batch, whether that's now or when we're closing the period. We then jump over to a section called control, and this is kind of our batch control total. And what we're doing in the system is when we're entering in a journal transaction, obviously we want our debits and credits, as you can see below, to be equal. And we need to keep a control total, which is kind of the batch total that says, I'm about to put in this case, 2 lines, but 25 lines, 50 lines. Before you go through, you want to make sure that when you're done, your debits and credits equal the same amount. And also, you can use this control total as a way to quickly, maybe on your calculator or on some other way, total up that I know when I'm done entering this batch, the total should be a certain amount. It's a nice way to be able to put it in there and then reference it after the fact. Say, yep, I put all my transaction in, the control total was 150. I know that when I release this batch, that I feel confident that the information in the system is good. So that gives me kind of that header or the batch information that we have out there. The next section that we're going to run into, let's get into the details. So we've got the batch information, okay, I'm telling what the control totals, what everything should be. Well, now I want to actually start posting things against my accounts and sub-accounts. So how do I do that? So looking at the screen, the first field that we're going to have here is a company field. With Dynamics SL, we have the ability to have multiple companies. So in this case, I could have chosen any company, but it's going to default to the one that's been set up in the system. Now, as I come to the next field, it's my account. What is the account that I'm putting this against? It's against this account, particular one here is account 1030. I can do a lookup list. I can see, yep, this is going to be a cash account entry. And then I can look at my sub-account to see exactly, in this case, I'm choosing the default entry, but again, I could choose any sub-account that I want to set up in the system and choose to put this entry against. Another thing to learn about doing data entry is that you can see I'm kind of looking at this thing kind of like an Excel document where I can scroll across and go to different fields. What I'm going to show you another field, another button that's located on here is the F4 button, which you see referenced here on the detail section. If I hit F4, the nice thing about that, it's going to show me that one line item all on one screen, so I don't actually have to go through and scroll all the way across. So you'll see some fields are disabled, and that's the reason why some of these fields are disabled is because those are not actual fields that we're using in the general ledger module. They're fields that are used in other modules that come from different areas, such as the project areas or the payroll areas or other areas. So the important fields to note while you're doing data entry is, of course, that account and sub-account. We need to know what it is. reference numbers, whether you want to have them auto-numbered or whether you want to go ahead and put them into the system. And then in this case, whether we're debiting or crediting that account. Now we also have the ability to type in a description, how we want to have that populated, whether we're typing it in or have it, that's going to mean. And a lot of modules we'll see as we jump into other modules, how does that field get set coming from the different areas. Now as I'm entering things into the information, we can view exactly, again, the account, the sub-account, and then we can start entering our next line item to the system. Now once we have things entered into the system, we need to then tell it, okay, we're done with this batch and we want to start processing it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and tell it to release now. Release now tells it that I'm done with it and I'm ready for you to go ahead and process it to the account history table. And then we'll talk about actually what all these different items mean. So by clicking on release now and clicking on the finish button, it's going to go ahead and it's posted real quickly there. It's letting me know it's completed. And it's gone ahead and posted that, or put it in a release status that it's ready to go get posted to your general ledger. Now another type of item that you can set up here is a recurring item. If we go back into our PowerPoint, one of the things we talked about is that you can do a recurring transaction. Now, sometimes I like to present it this way because it makes it a little bit easier to understand. On that same journal transaction screen, we can tell it the cycle and the number of cycle numbers. So what does that mean? Well, the current cycle is going to allow me to determine how often does this transaction go. So let's say maybe it's a mortgage payment, maybe it's a loan payment, something that's going to happen for some reason where we want to do this in the journal transaction screen. So the first field here that says cycle is allowing me to define how frequently does it happen. So 1 would be that I want it to happen every period, 3 meaning that I want it to happen every quarter. So I have the ability, the flexibility to set up exactly how I want. Now looking back here also, we have the number of cycles. So for example, in the example I have here, if I set 1, meaning every period, and 12, it means that it's going to go ahead and set up this entry every period for the next 12 periods. So it'll allow me to go ahead and set it up once, and will allow us to go ahead and generate those recurring vouchers over and over again. Now there is an original batch number which will get populated once we go ahead and generate it. So it says if I've created a recurring batch and it's been generated from it, it'll allow me to know where it came from. So what we have is a separate screen, and it's called the Generate Recurring Batches screen, which is we'll see here in a second. And then it allows me to pull up any existing batches that are out there. It says, yep, you haven't done it for this period or this whatever cycle we're on. So we can click on that button, hit the Begin Processing button, and it's going to go ahead and generate that new journal transaction. Now when we do that and we go back into Dynamics SL, we'll be able to pull that particular one up inside of here. So if we went into the Generate Recurring and hit the Begin Processing, it lets us know that it's completed. And as I said, if we go into the journal transaction screen, we're going to have a brand new entry up there. So it's gone ahead, known that we had it, and known that we were ready for it to post and set it all the way to the update the account history tables. Now the next thing I want to talk about is let's talk a little bit about statuses, because we saw some statuses and I kind of glanced through them, but I want to kind of go back and give you the idea of some of these batch statuses that you have. So if you see the status of on hold, what that means is that the batch is in the system, but we really haven't done anything with it. Examples are I started entering the batch, but I didn't finish it, or I have not been given the access rights to actually release it. Maybe we're doing segregation of duties, and you can enter it into the system, but I don't want you to be able to release it because I want someone else to actually review it before you do it. The next is balanced. Balanced lets us know that if it's balanced, that the credits and the debits match, the control tells everything looks good, and if you post it, we're going to be happy because there is a balance there. The next status that you could have is a voided batch. It means that something was wrong with it or something we didn't like about it, and we went into the system and voided it out. The next idea is an unposted batch. What that means is you probably saw when I was releasing it that it went into an unposted status. What that means is that it has locked it down, it said that it's valid, it's ready to go, but it has not posted to the general ledger. Why? Well, there's different reasons. I could have set it up in the system that I don't want it to automatically post, or that I do want it to automatically post. And based on that setting, it depends on whether it went to the unposted status or the status which is after that, which is called the posted status, the completed posted status. Again, the big difference, unposted, it's in general ledger, but it actually hasn't hit the account history tables that are keeping track of your debits and credits. And when it's posted, that means that you know that, yep, it actually has hit our accounts. Our accounts and subaccounts have been updated, and the history behind them has been set. The next thing that we have is the handling. So those are the different statuses. How do I invoke those different statuses? Well, if I choose the status of hold, it means not ready to do anything with it yet. Now, it could be the status that it could have been put into another status, like a balance status or something else, and I want to put it back to a hold status because I'm not really happy with where it's at. Again, that hold's going to take it. No action, well, that's the default. If I pull up a batch and save it, and leave no action, it just means I was just looking at the batch. I didn't want you to do anything to it. Leave it whatever state it is. The next option is for release later. And then again, that's going to put it into a balance status, and then say, I'm not quite ready for it, but I want to make sure before I'm done with it, is it balanced? In this case, it's going to make sure that your credits and debits are equal so that you're not trying to release something later that you go, it pops up an error message saying something's out of balance, you need to make an adjustment. So you have that ability to check it before you actually release it. And release now says that you're done with it. I'm ready to post it. Again, based on our settings and the general ledger that we've set up in the system, determines whether it will go to unposted or posted, but then that's saying, I'm done with it, let's move forward with it. So with that, we had an ability to talk about the ability of entering in a journal transaction. We've talked about the different statuses. It's something kind of to get your head around to understand what all those different things mean. We put in a batch. It was against accounts and subaccounts. We made sure the debits and credit matched, and then we went ahead and we released it. Now, another thing is, of course, we live in a perfect world, and we could never potentially put anything incorrect. Now, with that, we've added some great functionality here just to make life a little bit easier when you're actually needing to correct something. So if I go back into my journal transaction screen, of course, when I'm in the system and I'm going in, and let's go ahead and pull up a previous batch that's been posted, I might look at it and go, you know what? Scroll across, write debit and credit amounts, but you know what? That's the wrong account and subaccount. You do have an option. So again, we give you different options of what you can do. One is you might say that was completely the wrong account and subaccount, totally messed it up, and I can choose reverse. And what we'll do is we'll create the exact same batch with the exact reverse of accounts of the debits and credits and allow you to release it. So that's great. So if I click on that, it's going to create a reversing, let me know that it did it, and then I can go ahead and pull it up in the system. See that it's out there. Now it's there, it's locked, and it's ready for me to release. Now another option you could say, well, let's go back to the other batch that we had that was out there that got posted. You might say, yeah, I do want to go ahead and I want to reverse it, but I also want to make a brand new entry because it was close. It's just I chose the wrong account and subaccount. So I do both. It's gone ahead and created both. So now I have a reversing, and I also have a correcting. The big difference between this, one that's reversing, it's going to say, I'm not allowing you to change it, go ahead and release it. It's going to totally undo what you had before. But now I want to go through and actually make some edits because it was really just the wrong account and subaccount. So I could go through, choose the account, choose the subaccount, make a change, make whatever changes I want, and go ahead and process it. And the last, but of course not least, is like, hey, this is a great batch. I want to do this batch all the time. And I decided that maybe at the time, recurring wasn't something that I'd already set up in the system, but I'm finding after the fact that I'd really like to create this batch again because it's making an entry that's potentially long, potentially something that I don't want to have to do all the time. So that last option here, which is copy, allows me to make a copy of that exact entry. And then it's available for me to open up, and now I can add things to it, edit it, and so forth. So a great bit of functionality because, as we all know, accidents will happen, and this allows us to be able to make corrections to those items, whether we put the wrong accounts, wrong subaccounts, or just needed to erase something that was put into the system. So that concludes our entering of entering things into the journal transaction screen, the next thing we'll look at is our process screens. So we've got the data in it. You saw me release things, but there's other ways to do things. So we'll talk about how do you release a batch, potentially that's still sitting in our journal transaction screen. We talked a little bit already to generate recurring. We kind of walked through that already. Again, if something is in that unposted status, how do I actually get it to post? What's the process? Allocations, what are they and what are they used for? We'll talk about closing the periods so we can keep things moving forward in the year. We'll talk a little bit about generating reading consolidations and also deleting our GL detail and what that means. So the first screen that we're going to take a look at is our release GL batches. Now, one of the things I talked about is a lot of times companies will say, sure, Jeff, jump into the journal transaction screen, start entering our batches for us, but we'd like to actually segregate the duties. So it's your job, Jeff, to enter things into the system, but it's someone else's job to actually go ahead and review the batches and post them. So what we do is we have a screen that allows us to do exactly that. So on here we see that we have our release GL batches screen. What that is allowing us to do is to view any batches that are currently sitting out there in what we call a balanced status, which we talked about. So we see any ones that are out there, yep, there's one that's in there, and I can just click on it and click begin processing, and it will go through the process. Again, there could be one batch, there could be multiple. I can sort it by company, I could view all the ones that are out there, and it allows me to go through and view all those batches and post them. The next thing that we have is posting transactions. Now, the posting transaction process works for whether you're working in the general ledger module or you're working in something like payables or receivables. So what the post transaction screen is going to do for me is we can see is it allows me to specify, well, what do you want to actually post to the general ledger? And if I scroll down here, we'll see that there are some GL or general transactions or general ledger transactions in the system that are out there. And what this means is if I see them in the post-transaction screen, it means that they're in that unposted status, meaning that we've decided we don't automatically want to post and update the account history. So if I want to go and actually post them, and I haven't set it up the system to automatically post, I can come here and do it by module. So I could say I only want to see the GL items that are out there and refresh my grid. Great, now I can see just those. I could see for all companies, just for one company. And what it allows me to do is by choosing any of these items out here, I can say, yep, this is the one I want to post. And the only thing it's doing is making sure that when I hit begin processing, it's going to go ahead and automatically update my account history. So now my account history has the transactions from there automatically posted to that. Again, can be used. You could set it up in the system and your setup screens that you don't want to have to wait to post, but you have that option if that's something how you want to delegate and segregate your duties. The next screen is allocations. Now the idea behind an allocation is that, let's say for example, it's the utility bill and we have multiple departments within inside of our company. So what we want to be able to do is, yes, we got the utility bill, well I want to take those and allocate those out to other departments within inside of our company. So what we have is an allocation screen, and within the allocation screen you'll see that we can go ahead and define what we're going to call this allocation. In this case we'll just call it utilities. And for example, let's say 750 happens to be the account that we're using to keep track of those. And then we can say, yep, 750,000. We talked about subaccounts allow us to define the details. So maybe 000 is the master company or general place we're going to do it. And then we can say, yep, but when we go ahead and post things, we want to go ahead and allocate it out to all these different locations. Now, these different locations could be departments, it could be locations, it could be whatever you need to have. So we could go ahead and allocate things across different areas. So we're allowed to go ahead and create our allocations in here and then create our allocation batches. So it'll automatically generate, when something goes against this account and subaccount, it'll automatically generate the other allocations as well. So a way to save time, and it keeps me from being able to have to go in and type everything over and over again. Now some things you should notice as well is we have the ability to break it out by percentages or by specific dollar amounts. We can go ahead and set up our different factors here. Here you can see we can break it up by percentages so that when something comes in for a certain dollar amount, it'll know each different department gets a different percentage based on possibly the size of the company, of the department, or the size of the location. So you have that flexibility to set that up. And then when you're ready to actually move forward with generating, there is a generate allocation screen that will pop up, and it will show you the ones that are available. So if we were to jump into the screen, and I said there is a generate allocation screen, Again, we see there's some out here. We could go ahead and choose the one we want to go ahead and run, hit begin processing. Well, didn't have anything in there, but if we had something in the system, it would go ahead and allocate it against those different areas. The next screen is the closing screen. Now, the idea of closing inside of Dynamics SL is something that I kind of want you to understand. The idea is that we do have all those different periods that we set up in the system, and we said this is first period and this is when it ends. Now, with inside of Dynamics SL, we have the flexibility to allow you to post to previous periods or not, which you kind of saw on the setup screens. So without turning off the functionality, it allows you to post things to the current journal, current period. And then we can say, you know what, we're done. It's the end of the month. I want to close the period so people stop posting things against this period and start posting it to the next. A lot of questions are, how do I do that? Of course, we have a closing screen. And the closing screen will allow us to first see all the different modules. And of course, we're currently looking at the general ledger. And what it's showing me here is that where I currently am with my fiscal period is for GL, we're at period 6. And then I have the options. I can either choose, you know what, I don't want to close it. We're okay with it. Or, yep, I want to close the period because we're done for this particular period, or I want to close the year. Obviously, the year makes sense. It'll happen when we get to the closing of the fiscal year. The reason why we show this is that, of course, many times you're not going to close out your general ledger before your payables. So payables, you might be done and say, yep, we're done. I want things to start posting to the next period. And what you're doing here as far as data entry, and we'll look at when we get to the payables and receivables areas, is that you're just making it increment the fiscal period. So when people default to enter something into the system, they don't need to remember, okay, what is the current fiscal period? Same thing here with the general ledger. It's just going to tell us what do we need to default to. So when we're entering data into the system, it does that. The last little checkbox here is that whether we want to delete detail. Now, the idea behind deleting detail is that maybe you want to get rid of older transactions that are in the system that you no longer want to be there. We talked a little bit in the setup screen about the idea that you can say, well, how far back do you want to delete detail? You could set it for 24 months, 36, 48 periods, whatever you happen to want to have set up in the system. Now, you could optionally go ahead and choose to delete detail right here when you're actually closing. Now, another screen you can do this on is the delete GL detail screen. Again, what it's going to do is it's going to remove data based, and what it's showing you on this screen here is based on the information setup and the GL setup. So it looked there and it said based on your setting of how much you want to retain and the current period and what you want to delete, if I ran it for today, this is what it would go through. Now, as always, whenever you're going to delete something out of your system, we would always recommend that you always do a backup of your system before you go through. Again, delete detail is something you do not have to do. It's not a requirement, but is available to you if there's a reason why you want to get rid of some older data in the system. So that concludes our section of those screens, those process screens. The next thing we're going to go through is we're going to talk about our inquiries and reportings. So we've set up GL. We've gone ahead and set up our accounts and subaccounts. We've gone ahead and put in journal transactions against our accounts and subaccounts. We've gone ahead and made sure everything was balanced. We went ahead and processed some things. We've released batches. We posted things to the general ledger and to the accounts that are in there. So the next step is to, okay, how do I report on this information? What's the process of me going through and viewing information in the system? So what we'll do is we'll look at some of the summary screens. We'll take a look at some of the reports, including our trial balance and our detailed general ledger report. We'll take a look at the information that's available to you. And another process that's inside of Dynamics SL called our quick query feature that allows us to actually allow you to do a little bit more of ad hoc. So with that, let's go ahead and let's start with our account summary. Jumping back here into Dynamics SL. So the first screen I want to look at here is the account summary inquiry screen. Now, the idea behind this is that it gives us a place to go to show us, what have we put against this specific account. So if I put in an account, I can either type it in or do a lookup. And let's just choose this cash account that we have out there. Then once I go ahead and choose the account, it's going to show me the current period, the ledger that it's going to default to, and the budget information. And if I click on Display Refresh, it's going to show me currently what is that account and what's the balance against it. So we can see what our balance is if we had a budget set up for it as well. So okay, that's great. It's lots of money out there. How do I get to the details? Well, the details button at the bottom of the screen will show you, okay, here's the breakout. Here's the account and subaccount breakout. So we had rolled up to the account level. Let's show me, based on the combination of account and subaccount, what we have out there. So I can choose a line item out there, click on that details button again, and it's going to take me down to the details here. The account subaccount detail inquiry screen that shows me what it is. We see the description of what it was, the amount, and I can even drill back if I like to that original journal transaction screen where the entry was put against this particular account. So I can get down to the details and see exactly how did things get put against this. So the account history inquiry, or the account summary inquiry screen is a great way, and basically what we did, if you look on the screen, we started here at the top, we drilled down to the summary and then to the detail. So you can see you could start at any of those levels that we see on the menu, or we could start at the top. Now the next thing we're going to talk about are the reports that we have out in the system. So many different reports that we have on the system. We have, of course, information around our setup, so you can look at your chart of accounts or sub-accounts. You know, nicety to have after you set up your chart of accounts or after you set up your sub-accounts to share that with the company. Say, hey, this is what we're going with before we start entering transactions in. So we're going to go ahead and print them out so people have, and of course you're going to find that. You're going to find what I would call it a maintenance report. So you had a maintenance screen, here's what we set up, and here's what we put into the system. Now the other areas we're going to see around the detailed general report or GL transaction reports. Now, for example, we want to look at a trial balance report. The trial balance report, it's going to show you important things like your beginning, current, and ending balances. It's basically going to show you when something was entered into the system and allow you to make adjustments. So as we go into that report, it allows us to go ahead and mark things, for example, that say, yeah, there's some issues here or there's some items that we need to look into. Here's the adjustments that we need to make as well. We also have a detailed general ledger report. Again, it's going to show us all the different transactions, and it's great for, again, beginning and ending balances, but it's also good for auditing and archiving. It's also really good when you're reconciling, we'll talk about later when we get to the other modules, reconciling against your accounts payable and your accounts receivable. And we also have our general ledger transaction. And this is basically going to have a list of all your transactions that are out there, whether they're posted or unposted, so you kind of can see the ones that are out there, what's gone through, what hasn't gone through. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into a live view of that. So again, if we go through, look at our trial balance report, let's just talk about how do we interact with these reports. So with our trial balance report, we have different what we call formats. So we have the ability to view things combined. We can view them where there's breaking it out by credits and debits. So we have that functionality there. Then we had the ability to specify a reporting date, a period range, whether we want to see just for the current period or for a whole range. And then when we want to view it, in this case, we're going to preview it on the screen. What it allows me to do is, as we talked about, we're seeing our accounts and sub-accounts. We're seeing our beginning balance. So we can see any debits or credits that have happened to the particular account. And we can see what the ending balance is. Now, of course, it's spelled for you to print out so you can make adjustments and the margins here and keep information. And then be able to take this back so when you need to go into the system and get some more information. In our interface with our reporting, you have the ability to drill down if you wanted to just see assets, or if you want to jump right to a specific account that was into the system. So you have the ability to jump to the pages where that information is so you can not have to scroll around and find everything that you're looking for. So we have that great way of getting to the information there. Other areas we did talk about as well as our detailed general ledger report, or looking at our GL transactions. Again, the GL transaction is nice because it's going to show you the ability to say, show me what hasn't posted yet. So what does that mean? Again, we talked about the idea of posted and unposted. So just to reiterate that idea, unposted means that you've gone ahead and you're in SL and you're in the journal transaction screen or somewhere, and you have said, I'm locking down this batch. So I posted it and I've released it and it's now gone to an unposted status. That means it's in the system. It means it hasn't updated your account history at this time. So what I want to do is actually go ahead and do that posting process that we talked about, and that'll actually go into the system and update your accounts. So we have the ability within here to view unposted or posted. Might be a great way to see what are those batches that are hanging out there that we haven't released yet, so you can get a quick look at them. Within the ability of Dynamics SL, we've talked about this in the intro course, but you do have the ability to use different information. We can sort information, we can select. We have different options based on the type of report, whether we want to have a cover page or whether we want to show things for a different But again, referring back to the Dynamics SL intro course, you've learned a little bit more on the whole idea of interfacing with our reports. Now, one other last area I want to talk about as far as doing entry is a feature that we call Quick Query. Now, what the Quick Query area allows you to do is it's similar idea to a report, but what it allows us to do is pull up into specific information. So, for example here, what it allows me to do is I can query the SL database. I can then, on the fly, do filters, sorts. I can add columns, remove columns, export things to Excel because, let's face it, where do we work in our world? Well, we like to get things out to Excel so we can look at them and sort and select and filter things. So with that, let's go ahead and jump back into our Quick Query screen. All right. So the Quick Query screen that we had open, the Quick Query interface allows us to get to different things. So we could look at, for example, our journal transactions. So we have different reports that are out there. So if I click on Journal Transactions, what it's showing me on the screen are all the journal transactions that have been put into this particular area. I can see things like this is a journal type. We talked about GJ. We talked about batch numbers, whether it's coming from the general ledger area, and so forth. Nice thing about Quick Query is I can say, you know what, I only want to see, if I scroll through, we can see there's different type of batches for different areas, so there's the other modules that are out there. I could say, you know what, I only want to see things that are coming from the journal type of GJ. So all I need to do is type that in, and it's automatically changed the view below, so now I'm only seeing things that are on the GJ area. So that's the journal type that we entered the system. And that's great. If you want to see something on the fly and maybe it'll help you find the information, great. Now, a lot of times you're going to say, well, there's a need to actually find a little bit more. So if I click on this expand button, I can actually add as many different filters as I like. So I could do it where things are equal to GJ. I could go ahead and add another filter. And I could say it where we're looking maybe for a specific account. We can look for, maybe we're looking for an entry in the system that's against a specific credit amount. You have all those ability to add things as you need them. Next thing I can do is I can also move things around. If it's more important that my account is sitting at the front, all I need to do is click on the account and drag it up to the front and move them around based on my needs. The second, if I decide, you know what, all I'm really worried about, I've gone ahead and sorted and selected, and you know, I only have one company, it's company 60, so I'm not really worried about this field. I can go ahead and choose to remove it on the fly. I also have the ability to use our column chooser to be able to add and remove fields that are available for this report right on the fly. And so once I get the data into the screen, we talked about one of the common things we like to do is once we get the data in here the way that we like it and it's looking good, a lot of times what we can do is take that information and export it out to Excel. Now we have a couple different options here. We can use the copy to table feature, which all that is going to do is just take that data in this screen, click and copy to table, and all it's done is take and make a copy of it and put it right into Excel for me. So that's great. I can start doing some sorting, selecting. Maybe I only want to see certain accounts. That's great. But that information that's in here is static, meaning that there is no ability for me to actually do anything with it after that. It's great to have, but it is static. But we also have two other options here, just to talk about real quickly. We have the ability to export thing out. It's going to look real similar, but we have the ability to say, I want to bring just the rows that we filtered. And when I click on Create, you might say, that looks pretty much the same. And it does look very much the same. It's the same bit of information. But the neat thing about this is if I go into the Data tab, is we know that we can refresh this information. So this means that I can export the data once, hit refresh, and it's always going to allow me to refresh the data in here. So a great functionality there that allows me to take the data and make a refreshable Excel document. And last but not least, if you are a pivot table person, we also support that functionality as well. So if you want to take certain things out and go ahead and create a pivot table, you'll see the familiar pivot table interface. So now I can start dropping accounts, sub-accounts, and different fields into the rows, columns, labels, and report filters. So you've got a lot of great functionality with that Quick Query feature that allows you to not only view the information in a report, but it allows you to kind of get in and out and view the information. Now, the last thing I want to show you in Quick Query is that, again, it's trying to get you to find information. Maybe you have a specific question about account or a sub-account. How did things get into there? One of the things is that once you find the information in the screen, is that I can now right-click on these fields and I can go back and drill back into the information. So whether I needed to drill back into the chart of accounts, whether I was looking at a certain transaction, it will allow me to drill back into the original SL screen. So I could drill back to the journal transaction screen. I could drill back into different areas. So it allows me to get to the details, but also drill back to see exactly where this information came from. So there we have it. That is our general ledger introduction to the general ledger area. Again, we started from the beginning of setup. What we've discussed is we talked about the general ledger setup screen and what are some of those options that are in there? What do I need to think about? We set up our chart of accounts and sub-accounts. We walked through those screens and talked about the important fields that need to be set up there. Again, the idea of a chart of accounts is you're hitting a main account and you can use that sub-account to break things down. The next thing we did is we went ahead and entered a journal transaction into the screen. The big deal here, obviously, is learning the whole idea of a batch, control totals, and being able to enter in multiple lines in there. We talked about, along with journal transactions, the idea of a recurring transaction. We then jumped into, now that we've got the data into the system and we processed it, how do I view it? We went ahead and looked at a report, how to get into a report, and the different reports that are available. We went ahead and looked at an inquiry screen that's allowing me to drill down to the details. And lastly, we went and we learned about quick queries, this functionality that allows me at a high level to sort and select information and then get me back to the details that we need. So thanks again. Thank you for watching this course on Microsoft Dynamics SL's financials, specifically the General Ledger module. Thanks so much. We look forward to talking to you more about the other modules in the financial area.